Hello, I am live. Am I prepared? Is anyone else here? We shall see. I'm just going to fix up my lighting a little bit. Let's see. Let's do this. Okay. Hello, I'm Katie Roberts. You're here at my live stream. This is my third one where I just cover a topic quite quickly, 15 minutes. We draw one thing. I take you through some of my favorite techniques that hopefully might help you in your art. Excuse me, just adjust my scarf. And it's a sort of warm up for my Saturday sessions classes that I run, but it's also just for fun and to give you guys something free that hopefully you can learn from a little bit or enjoy watching me do. So it's going to take me a minute to get settled today. Have you got a cup of tea? Are you relaxing yet? Have you got your art materials? I'm obviously still catching up with myself, so I will give it another 30 seconds or so. See who else might join us. I've just been out into my garden to pick this magnificent rose. It's been out in the wild wind and rain for the last couple of days and has survived, and will be the subject for a longer drawing lesson that I think I'll make as part of my Drawing from Nature course. I already have a winter season, but I'm keen to make a spring season. So those of you who might be interested in that, you can check out katiesartclasses.com. KATIES, katiesartclasses.com, or email me. I'll leave my details below. So, oh gosh, the scent of this flower is incredible. Would you like a smell? Have a little, breathe that in. Absolutely beautiful. And it's usually quite blue. It's very mauve this year. So we're not going to be drawing this today because this would take too long, but we're going to be learning the principle, which is what we would use to draw this flower, but on a much simpler form. And hello to my person who's attending. Just saw someone here. We're going to be using the same principle that I would use to draw this complex flower, but for a smaller, easier to draw little flower like this. Now, as I have talked about in my previous lessons, the first most important thing is to observe the flower, to really look and spend some time getting to know it. And I think whole sensory experience of your subject matter is great if you can smell it, touch it, handle it, get a real sense of how it behaves. You can't do that obviously through the camera, but I suggest you spend a good deal of time doing that. That's not wasted energy. Observation is probably the one key thing to spend time on when you're learning to draw realistically. And I'll talk you through my process, and I'm going to draw on the big easel today. I'm hoping that you can see more clearly what I will be drawing. Hello to those who are here. So we're drawing a slightly more complicated flower today. This is not going to be replicated in the Saturday sessions lesson. This is a different lesson, but it's a great tip for drawing any more complex flowers. So I'll talk you through the process. So we've learnt about the central axis that runs through all cylindrical forms. And in this case, that central axis is curved with the stem of the flower. It goes right through where the stamens are, the stamen boss. I did get the name of that last week, thanks to my student Liz. And radiating from that central area are petals, just like last week's sort of daisy structured flower, but instead of just one course of petals, I don't know how well you can see, but there's two major courses. There's actually three courses, I think, of petals, and there's a lot more petals. But the great thing about this flower is you can really see the structure that it will really help us to draw it. We can imagine that structure. So instead of just the one ellipse around the outside of the petals, this flower needs 2 ellipses or 3, one for the central boss, one for the outer ring of petals, and one for that inner ring of petals that sits a little bit higher up. So I'm going to draw that up on my big drawing board here. And you won't be able to see the flower at the same angle that I am, but let's see if we can get a slightly better view for you. You can see my cup tea and things there. Okay, there we go. Let me just get the lighting right for it. And what's interesting about this is actually the light and the way it plays on those 2 ellipses and 2 domes. So just have a look at the lighting on that for a sec. We'll come back to that if we have time. And I'm going to start with drawing that central axis. Just noticed I've got a couple of marks on this page, but that's all right, we'll work through them. So the central axis curves through the stem and the flower boss, or the stamen boss. And I'm just doing a sweeping gesture line here. I'm not trying to get this too precise. But then, let me just look at this guy again. I'm going to swing the ellipse, and I have to get that on the right angle. Swing the ellipse for the boss. Keep these lines loose and sketchy to start with. And then swing the ellipse for the outer ring of petals. Now, that ring is obviously a lot larger. Do pay attention to the distances between the central boss and the outer rim of the ellipse. Because the ellipse is not flat like it was with the daisy, it is cupped. It comes in upwards at the outer edge. So what that means is that when I'm looking at it, the distance between here and here is much shorter than the distance between here and here. So that gives us that sense that we're looking into the cup of the flower. Now the next ring or ellipse is for the inner ring of petals. And what's interesting to observe here is that they are so cupped or upright that in fact 2 of those petals overlap the boss. So it's a sort of a broken ellipse. I'm just going to draw the ellipse as if it was whole, but I'm noting that a couple of those petals are really coming right in. Let me get you a little bit closer so you can see and knock things over, see what I'm drawing. So that outer ring for that large ellipse of petals and an inner ring. Now, similarly to last week, where we divided those rings into their petals, we can do that again, but this time I wouldn't necessarily count them. Spend way too long if I did, but I would just think about how many sort of divisions there might be. If you did want to count them, you can. You could look at just a quarter at a time. But most of these are, I think they're mostly double layered. So they almost become like a surface in and of themselves rather than a ring. Now this paper is, I'm going to start again because that paper is has some cut marks in it from something artwork that I was cropping the other day. So let's just begin again and I'll talk you through that and we'll go to the next step. So we arc the stem, which is the central axis, giving it a little bit of gesture. And then we observe the crosshair, which gives you the angle for the first ellipse, which is the central boss. The larger ellipse, which is the outer ring. Again, these are just sketchy lines. I wouldn't go so dark normally, but I am so you can see what I'm doing. And an ellipse, the inner ellipse, gives us that second ring of petals. If you've just joined us, we're drawing a 2-ringed or 2-tiered layered flower here. Okay, now imagine that that axis continues through these cups, and you can get a sense of the way that they are all pinned around that central point, and yet the ring, the outer rim of it, sits quite differently along that central axis. The key to this is observation. So if you're struggling to understand this, really look at your subject matter, really look at your flower and see if you can work it out. I keep on changing the angle, making my life slightly difficult. So I'm going to break it up into radiating petals, but I'm just sketching those in really lightly. I can even use a kind of arcing mark, which will give me a sense of those petals. Remembering when we're sketching, we're really building up the form quite loosely, and it's something you build on. It's not got to be perfect the first time. Let me just do a little time check. Okay, we'll go for a few more minutes. Hope you're drawing along or gaining something from this. Now, if I was to do this inner ring, just follow the same principle, but I'm making sure that I'm conveying that those petals are quite upright compared to the outer ring of petals. I'm just going to use the eraser to knock back some of that structural mark making so that we can see these petals overlap that central boss. I'm going to go around, I'm going to put these in a little bit more firmly so you can see how to go about the process. So take as much time on this step as you like. Really observe those petals. I'm going to be rushing through this step. Pay attention to the negative space between those petals. That will be a really good clue for you as to the width of the petals and how closely packed they are. So I'm now going to go around the outer edge of the flower. I'm actually looking at the negative space, comparing the subject to its background. Now you might start to notice tone at this point, but let's put that aside for just a minute while we finish this line drawing. And when these, it's called foreshortening, when these petals are effectively, we're looking straight down them. Oh, something interesting's happening to my screen. Then we are drawing them a lot shorter than we know them to be because of how they appear to us. Okay, so that's a bit of a structural drawing of that flower. Now, normally I would erase all of the structural lines before I went to tone, but I'm just going to show you quickly how to modulate this in tone. Let's see if I can find my eraser. We'll just use what I have to hand, which is a piece of blue tack. So if you're ever stuck for an eraser, blue tack will do. So just knocking back some of those structural lines. And thinking about tone now. Now what's interesting is we discussed how tone, well, how this form is really like a flat surface. Those petals themselves are so packed together that they're almost continuous. And you notice when the light's shining on this flower, because of the cupping, even though the light is coming from this direction, well, because the light's coming from that direction, it hits that front wall of petals on the inner ring. But the back wall of petals is in shadow. And that's because of that inner ring. So we get this lovely play of light where it goes from dark to light to dark again. So conveying these really simple arrangements of tone will give you a very three-dimensional feel to your work, and I'll just quickly block that in so you can hopefully get a sense of how that works. Yeah, be careful to observe the truth of what you're seeing. Now we have not very much time left. You can see I'm sketching this in really quite quickly and roughly. And what I would do if I spent more time on it is to go back around and clarify all the lines and erase all of it with the extraneous marks that aren't necessary. But you can see that even though this is quite a crude drawing, you've got a sense of the three-dimensionality. I wanted to amplify that. I would put some darks into the background there so that that flower really pops out, as they say. So these principles can then be extrapolated. Those 2 rings could be turned into however many rings you need to describe a much more complex flower like this beautiful rose from my garden. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 rings, probably 8 if you include one of the outer rings, as a loose way of starting to gain an understanding of structure before you go to tone and colour and all those other things. This approach avoids your drawing looking flat. A lot of people will, especially when they're beginners, draw beautiful tonal modulations of the petal and the flower, but it won't look three-dimensional. And it's getting this sense of structure that I've talked about in the last 3 classes that will really underpin a more three-dimensional understanding and approach to drawing. So thank you for that thumbs up from somebody. Please feel free to like and subscribe, as they say. They're separate things. You can just press the thumbs up if you want to like. You can press subscribe if you want to get a notification whenever I post a video. You can click the little bell button next to the subscribe button. There's no fees involved. You don't need to sign in. Oh, you do, to your YouTube account. Not to anything I have. So encourage you to get out into your garden, have a look for a flower that's got multiple tiers, and have a go drawing a structural drawing to underpin your beautiful study of that flower. And it can be very loose and quick, or it can be very technical and precise, depending on the level of accuracy that you want. I'm going to go teach my other class now. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again. There'll be another live stream next Saturday at 2:30. Take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.